I've been wanting a mechanical keyboard for a while now, but if you've ever looked into buying one, you'll know what I mean when I say it's easy to get overwhelmed. There's just so much information out there, YouTube videos, guides, forums, you name it. But if there's one thing I learned after hours of Googling, it's that, no amount of online research is actually going to tell me what I like or dislike, because at the end of the day, I can't touch or feel everything in person, if you know what I'm saying. I can't believe I'm putting this on the internet. But my point is, just like losing your virginity, you aren't going to know what you like or dislike, and what someone else likes may differ from what you like. Also, after you buy your first keyboard, it's very likely that you're going to get another, even if it's just another set of switches or keycaps. So your first one ain't even gonna last that long anyway, just like the guy I lost my virginity to. For the record, if you know me in real life, this is all a joke because I'm still a virgin. So today I wanted to make a video that condenses and synthesizes everything I learned and share my decision-making process for buying my first keyboard, so that other first-time keyboard buyers out there can figure out which keyboard to buy, hopefully more quickly than I did. All right, before we get into my decision-making framework, we gotta know what we're working with. So let's quickly dive into the anatomy of a mechanical keyboard. First up, we have the case. This is the outer shell that houses all the components of the keyboard. Next, we have the PCB. Think of this as the brains of the keyboard that is responsible for translating your keystrokes into electrical signals. Moving on, we have the plate. The plate is a rigid layer that sits on top of the PCB and provides stability and support to the switches. And then there's stabilizers. These are like crutches. It basically prevents key wobble for the larger keys like the spacebar. Next, the switches. This is basically the mechanism underneath the keycap and is responsible for the feeling and the click, clack, thok, thud sounds of the keyboard. Switches come in various types that we'll talk about later. Lastly, we have keycaps. These are the buttons that you actually press when typing, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into each of these elements, but I wanted to provide a high-level overview first so that I'm not just throwing jargon at you. As you can tell, there are a lot of moving parts when it comes to a mechanical keyboard. So when thinking about the decision-making process for buying my first keyboard, there were three primary factors that I took into account: effort, budget, and features. So what do I mean by effort? Well, mechanical keyboards are offered on a spectrum from pre-built keyboards to fully custom keyboards. Pre-built means that whatever you buy is immediately ready for use and therefore requires the least amount of effort. In the middle of the spectrum, you have semi-custom options where you can buy what is called a bare bones kit, which is basically the pre-assembled base of the keyboard and usually includes the PCB, case, plate, and stabilizers. The only other pieces you need to buy are switches and keycaps. And finally, at the other end of the spectrum, you have fully custom keyboards that require you to build every single component of the keyboard and can include soldering, which obviously would require the highest amount of effort. For me, I was open to a pre-built or semi-custom option because a bitch was not about to solder. I figured as a keyboard noob, it made sense to just get my feet wet and not go to home run, you know? The next step was to determine my budget. I was willing to spend about $200 to $250, which is sadly still on the lower end of the spectrum because keyboards are damn expensive, but it is what it is. Hold up. Damn, shipping be fast these days. But before I open up my package, I want to explain how I chose this keyboard and what features I was looking for. So with mechanical keyboards, you have different options for every component of the keyboard. And considering how many moving parts there are, things can definitely get a bit hectic. So I'll try to walk through all the available options as concisely as possible. First up, we have the case. There are a variety of materials offered: plastic, steel, aluminum, acrylic, you name it. I chose aluminum for a heavier and sturdier feel. There are also different sizes to choose from. 100% layouts are full-sized keyboards that include the numeric keypad. 80% keyboards are also called 10 keyless keyboards because the numpad is removed. 75% keyboards are what's most common on laptops and is essentially a compact version of the 10 keyless layout. 65% keyboards remove the F function keys and the 60% further removes the arrow keys. I chose a 75% layout because the arrow keys are essential, whereas the numpad is just a nice to have. Next up is the plate. This also comes in many different materials: steel, brass, carbon fiber, polycarbonate, and so on. The type of plate you choose can have an impact on the acoustics of your keyboard. So denser and stiffer materials like steel and brass provide a slightly higher pitch sound, whereas more flexible plates like polycarbonate will give that deeper, thockier sound. And girl, I had a preference for that thock. Oh my god, why I say it like that? And I had a preference for that thock, but honestly, I was cool with whatever since I knew I was going to choose either a bare bones or a pre-built option, meaning that I had slightly less flexibility to customize everything anyway. For the PCB, there are two main options: hot swappable and solderable PCBs. Hot swappable just means that the PCB has pre-installed sockets for your switches, so it's basically a plug and play option. Solderable PCBs, on the other hand, as the name implies, require soldering, which I don't know how to do. So I was definitely looking for a hot swappable option. The most and least important element to decide is the type of switches that you want. The switches are important because it will contribute significantly to the sound and feel of your keyboard, but at the same time, as I've mentioned, without trying everything out in person, it's really hard to know what you'll like and what you don't like. So don't put too much pressure on yourself to choose the right kind, because you can always play around with different options in the future. But anyway, there are three main types of switches: linear, tactile, and clicky. Linear switches move smoothly and consistently up and down and is relatively quiet. Tactile switches have a small bump on each keystroke and have a slightly clicky sound. And clicky switches have that same tactile bump and have the loudest sound. I knew that I didn't want something too loud, so I eliminated clicky switches right off the bat. I listened to a bunch of sound tests on YouTube to further narrow down my selection, but honestly, there's so much variance between videos and even between models and brands of switches, so ultimately I decided on both. I decided to get reasonably priced but well-reviewed tactile and linear switches so that I can just figure shit out on my own, you know. Okay, we're almost done. Let's talk about keycaps. Keycaps come in a variety of colorways, materials, shapes, and profiles. Your choice of keycaps will definitely influence the aesthetics of things, but depending on the quality and material of the keycaps can also influence the sound and feel of the keyboard. For me, I honestly didn't put too much thought into any of these factors other than picking a color that I was okay with. And the last few features to consider were things like, do I want a wireless keyboard versus a wired keyboard? Does my keyboard need to be compatible with Mac or PC? And do I want a knob or no knob? For me, wireless was a nice to have. I wanted compatibility with Mac and PC and didn't care to have a knob. Okay, unboxing time. I ended up buying the fully assembled Keychron Q1 version 2. After taking into account all the features that I wanted, I ranked them in terms of most important to least important. And the biggest non-negotiable for me was compatibility with Mac without having to reprogram any of the settings. So this helped me significantly narrow down my options to mostly brands like Keychron and newfie. I ended up going with Keychron because they had an aluminum case, and I opted for, I don't know what that was. And I opted for the fully assembled version with the linear Gateron red switches and the silver gray keycaps because it was only about $20 more than the bare bones kit, so I figured why not. And since I was also going to get another set of tactile switches, this was just more bang for buck. During my research, I did make note of which brands seemed to work well depending on which features were most important, so feel free to use this as a guide, as a starting point to jump off of, but disclaimer, I am no expert, not an enthusiast, so please take it with a grain of salt and don't come for me. So I'm super excited to start using my new keyboard, and maybe I'll do a proper review in the future, so let me know in the comments if that's something you would like to see. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and please hit the subscribe button if you want to. And before I leave, I shall leave you with a nice, thocky sound test. Bye!